Hey guys, I hope that you are doing well. This week we're in Matthew 23 and 24, and I want to go ahead and say this specifically in regards to Matthew 24. There are lots of things in Matthew 24. There's lots of things about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem that took place in AD 70 as the Romans invaded and took over the city and took over the temple. And then there are some parts that are, talking about the temple destruction and the end of time. And then some parts are talking specifically about when Jesus comes back again. And there's lots of things in there. There's lots of theology. There's lots of opinions. There's lots of lots of things that nobody really fully knows. But here's what I want you to know. I am not going to be able to dig into all of that during this video. However, I did take notes on everything that I read and on all the commentaries and all of those things and what they have to say about these things. And so if you go to my website, mattalleyministries.com, and you go to my blog and look up Matthew 23 and 24, I posted it yesterday. If you go and look at that, you'll be able to dig in a little bit more. So I would suggest that you would do that because we're just not going to have time to dig into all that on the video. But a couple of things I do want to bring out from Matthew 23 and 24. The first is this. We need to be people, if we are followers of Christ, we need to be people who practice what we preach. Jesus talked a lot about the Pharisees and the scribes and how they were the people who occupied Moses' seat. Moses' seat was a legitimate stone chair that was in front of the synagogues where people who had the authority to teach as Moses' successors, they would sit there. It simply meant the people who had the authority to teach, who were officially responsible for interpreting and applying the laws of Torah, the laws of Moses, the scriptures, to the everyday life of the people. And so as Jesus is talking about them, one of the things he says is that, hey, if what they're teaching lines up with Moses and they're treating the biblical text correctly, basically you are free to do what they say. Just don't do what they do. Well, why did he say that? He goes on to say that the reason he doesn't want them to do what they do is because their lives were not matching up to the loyalty to God that they professed to have. Their behavior was inconsistent with their teaching. And so here's what I want. We've got to be willing to practice what we proclaim. As believers, we have to practice what we preach. That's point number one out of Matthew 23. Point number two is this. We've got to live for an audience of one. You know, it's so easy to live for the approval of other people and the cheers of other people. But what I know is that the same people who are cheering one day are shouting crucify the next day. And people's opinions and their thoughts are fickle. And so if we live for the approval of man, then our lives are gonna constantly be like this. So live for an audience of one. You see, these people that Jesus is addressing, the Pharisees, the scribes, they are too concerned about what other people thought, and they weren't concerned enough about God's approval and living for an audience of one. We have to be more content with the approval of God than we are with the applause of man. There are too many people in ministry, but also too many believers that they would rather live their life to receive the applause of man, to be included, for people to be pleased with them, for people to think highly of them, than they are willing to stand up for their principles for the approval of God. And we as believers have to be willing to live for the approval of God over the applause of man. He talks about one of the things that they did. They had these smaller leather boxes that contained scrolls that they wore on their arms or they wore as headbands, and they contained scrolls from Exodus 13, from Deuteronomy 6, and Deuteronomy 11 specifically is what was in these small leather boxes, and they wore them around, and they made them bigger and bigger and showier so that they were called phylacteries, so that they could show other people that they were holy. So they could show other people, oh, look who I am, look how holy I am. Look, I'm taking Deuteronomy 6 and Deuteronomy 11 very, very literally, right? I am honorable. I am somebody who knows the scriptures. I'm somebody who's important. And so they were making these boxes bigger and bigger and bigger so that they could show it to other people, because they were so concerned about what other people thought instead of being concerned about what God thought about them. They were trying to they used their titles as status badges. They were trying to draw attention to themselves instead of to God and His scriptures. And Jesus makes it very clear that the point is not the titles. The titles are just words. The point is that they shouldn't be using these titles in order to confer some type of status or privilege or symbol in themselves, because it led to unbiblical pride for these people. Jesus doesn't want anyone to adopt some kind of status-seeking attitude, whether from the things they wear, what they do, or what their title is, because rabbi specifically, he mentions here, had become an inflated thing where their disciples had to obey them without question. They couldn't walk beside them or in front of them. They never could greet them first. They only could talk to him if they were talked to first. And Jesus says it can't be like that. You got to live for the approval of God, not the approval of man. If we are seeking honor and human reward now, we will forgo the reward that God has for us on Judgment Day. But if we don't seek honor and reward now, we will receive it then. We can't be people who use our leadership titles to assert superiority over other people. That's what pride does. Pride is simply wanting to have something more than the next person. It comes with comparison. It comes with this pleasure of being above the rest. But what Jesus makes clear is that it is humble service that is the way to Christ. It is living for an audience of one instead of the approval of man. The next thing I think we see in Matthew chapter 23, one of the things that he says about them is that they are applying this tithing law even to the smallest little things, but they're neglecting some very important things like justice and mercy and faith. And one of the things that I think happens in Christianity a lot is we major on the minors and we minor on the majors. What we have to do is major on the things that actually matter. The crucifixion, the resurrection. There's lots more than that, but we got to major on the things that actually matter. The what is essential to salvation. And then doctrines that don't affect salvation should not define us. We should put God's word above our truth or our traditions, and we got to quit majoring on the minors. We have to major on the majors and minor on the minors. And then the last thing I want to pull out of Matthew 23 is we got to care about what's happening inside more than we care about what's happening outside. You see these people that Jesus is talking to, the Pharisees, they failed to distinguish between external correctness and internal purity. I can look like I'm externally correct all day, but the question is, am I pure internally? This was the root of their hypocrisy. We have to put our inward holiness over our outward cleanliness. You know, the people of that followed the Hillel teaching in this day and time, their perspective was that if you clean the outside of the cup, it makes the cup clean. But the people of Shammai, who followed the rules and line of Shammai, you had to clean the inside and the outside. So obviously, the people he's condemning here are people who fall under the sect of Shammai, because what he's saying is that the outside is going to take care of itself when the inside is clean. He then uses whitewashed tombs. Whitewashed tombs, typically they were whitewashed at festival times to ensure that people passing by didn't inadvertently touch them, because that would have made them unclean and then they couldn't have taken part in the Passover. And he says, you know, they whitewash tombs and they look a lot cleaner than they normally do so that people avoid them. But inside, they're full of death. They're full of impurity. And so we've got to care more about the purity, the holiness of what's happening inside than we do looking good for other people and the correctness of what's happening outside, and trust that if the inside gets refined, if the inside gets purified, if the inside becomes holy, then the outside is going to take care of itself. So let's be a people who focus on the inside more than we focus on the outside. And then we get into Matthew 24. Again, lots of prophecies, lots of things about the destruction of the Jerusalem and the end of time. But specifically, I want to get to the end. And as Jesus is talking about all of these things, and he talks about how no one, not even himself, knows the day or the hour or the time, how it's going to come when it's least expected. What he tells us is that we as his disciples, we need to be ready, we need to be prepared, and we need to help other people do the same thing. His delay is going to be long, but his return is going to be sudden. And when he comes back, his judgment is going to be irreversible. Our hearts are going to be exposed. Our sentences might be surprising. But being watchful doesn't mean we just sit around and do nothing. No, being watchful means that we're not passive, that we do what God has called us to do, that we carry out the duties that God has given us, the responsibilities that he has given us, but we do so in a way where we're always keeping an eye out, where we're always ready, where we're always prepared in case he comes back. He mentions the day of Noah and how only Noah and his family were saved because they were the ones who listened to God and were actually prepared. The other people didn't even know that it was coming until it hit them. And he says the same thing's going to happen at the end if we're not ready and we're not prepared. We have to live a life of constant readiness, response, and preparation to God's word and what God says. Really, there are going to be two categories of people, the prepared and the unprepared. And so the difference in those two types of people is their readiness and not anything else. He says, hey, if somebody knew that a thief was going to break into his house, if they gave him a warning, you know what would happen? They wouldn't be caught sleeping and no one would be able to break into their house because they would be ready and they would be prepared. So in this day and time, continue to provide, continue to take an active role and take care of your responsibilities, but do it in a way where you're ready and prepared. Do it in a way that you're ready and prepared. There's no sense in trying this whole idea that people are trying to guess the day and the hour when Jesus is coming. What a fruitless endeavor. There's no sense in trying to guess that. You know what there is sense in? Us just being ready and prepared and helping others get that way too for whenever it does happen. So I want to leave you with this teaching again. Go and dig in more on Matthew 24 on my blog on MattAlleyMinistries.com. But I want to leave you with this question. How would you live differently today if you knew that Jesus was coming back tonight? How would today look different for you if you knew that Jesus was coming back tonight? Would you be caught walking in obedience or would you be caught wandering in disobedience? Would you be caught loving your neighbor or ignoring your neighbor? Would you be caught passionately devoted to your spouse or would you be caught being practically negligent of your spouse? Would you be caught hating sin or holding on to sin? How would your life look different if you knew that Jesus was coming back tonight? And if there's anything about your life that would change, knowing that Jesus is coming back tonight, I want you to know this, he might. There's no way to know. So whatever it is that needs to change, if you were to change something knowing he's coming back tonight, you need to go ahead and make that change so that you're ready, so that you're prepared for whenever Jesus sees fit to come back and fully consummate his kingdom among us. I love you guys. That's Matthew 23 and 24. We've only got 4 more chapters left, so we'll be back next week with Matthew 25 and 26. Hope you have a great week.